Hey, what's happening? Self-medication doesn't work, but meditation does. And let me tell you why. In a nutshell, self-medication is unnatural and meditation is natural. Meditation is magic, and if you don't believe there's magic in nature, then just look out the window. There's all kinds of examples. You just got to stop and look at them. Just like the whole caterpillar turning into a butterfly thing. I mean, that's magic, man. I mean, God's the only one that can make that happen. But so the other part of all this is just so you know, I think we're meant to just stumble through life and keep bumping our heads and figuring things out, and that's part of why we're here. So with that said, I thought I'd just kind of cover some things here. First of all, what is self-medication? That could be anything from a drug to alcohol to food, whatever it is that you use to hide your emotions and cover up stress and deal with stress, or however you want to word it. And meditation is just quieting the mind and listening to yourself, your inner self. It's all buried under your ego and all your analytical and intellectual thinking. So, with that said, it's easier to see if you have some examples, I guess. So, like if you see some drunk guy and people are trying to talk him out of his keys, so he doesn't drive, he shouldn't be driving. The drunk guy thinks he's in charge of everything. He's like, "Oh man, I know me better than anybody, so I'm fine to drive." And everybody that's sober around him is thinking, "Man, how does he not see that he's hammered? He's got no business being behind the wheel." But that's what we do, and the thing is, we do it with our sober minds as well. When you get advice from some trusted friend, or like whoever, a relative even, and he tells you something and you're like, "Man, I know me better than anybody, so why am I going to listen to Uncle Joe or whoever?" You know what I mean? I know what's good for me. But the thing is, you won't listen to yourself. And that's where the meditation comes in. If you quiet the mind, shut everything down, you'll actually have your true self. And then you can take that advice from the person that knows you better than anybody, yourself. So that, in a nutshell, that's kind of what's going on with the whole self-medication issue, and why meditation works over the top of it. So I'll just give you a little bit of history of what I've experienced. So when I was a kid, everybody was a smoker. Everybody was a smoker back then. It was cool to smoke. They weren't harmful, is what the Surgeon General was telling you at the time. Is there's nothing wrong with them. And since then, we figured out that's a lie. But so back then everybody smoked, and so that's the first thing you start doing is you want to be a grown-up, you want to act cool and whatever. So I started chasing around cigarettes, and then my dad drank beer, and so I would sneak a beer here and there as I got a little older. Well, then I lost my dad, so now I've got a huge reason to cover up all that grief and all that feeling. Again, a lot of this spawns from grief. That's a big reason why people self-medicate anyway. And so I lost Dad, and for one, the grief was hard to deal with. But then I didn't have somebody here to tell me any different. I mean, Mom was here and she tried, but I mean, I don't know. I guess I was scared of my dad and I wasn't scared of my mom. So that's the difference, really. But so then, as I cruised through high school and barely graduated, on the weekends I'm looking for a buzz at every turn. I'm smoking pot and drinking beer and doing all the things a teenager's not supposed to do, but we think we're cool and all that. So then I finally get out of high school and I joined the Air Force. Now the Air Force was great, don't get me wrong. I spent 6 years in there. I'm glad I did it. Wish I'd have never got out. But at the same time, it's not conducive to somebody trying to be sober. And I wasn't even trying to be sober, to be honest. But so the other thing too is, like, for an underage drinker, when you're in the military, they kind of look the other way. So it's easy to get by with underage drinking as well. But so that was my deal. I'm in the Air Force, and that's where I kind of learned how to be an alcoholic, to be honest. And then at the same time, I was learning how to play guitar. I teach myself how to play guitar, and so then I get out of the Air Force. Tried to be a musician for many, many years, 20, 25 years. I ran around trying to be a rock star. So I'm, have a family at home, but I'm in the bars at night trying to, think I'm going to make the big time someday. And it's just crazy. Again, stumbling through life. Nobody there to really straighten you out. But if you would have stopped for a second and listened to your inner self, you know what's right to do. But so with that being said, musicianship is not conducive to being sober for that, playing out in the bars and stuff anyway. Just not cool. So then, as my family got a little older, one of my kids ended up getting in a bunch of trouble, and he ended up getting incarcerated. And so that loss was another thing to cover up with alcohol. So here we go. Well, he ended up getting out of being locked up and then go right back into it, and then going out of it right back into it. He did that, I don't know how many times he got arrested, but every time he got arrested, I felt like I lost. I had to grieve again. It was huge. So it made me realize real early that I have an issue dealing with loss. And the way I dealt with it was to drink. So I drank just about every night, but pretty much every night. So then I just stumbled around, and finally we had a grandson. And when that happened, it changed everything. The love for that child squashed everything else that was going on. And they say the whole grieving process is really, it's because you have leftover love for somebody that's gone, and you don't have that love to give, so it's got to come out some way, And so you bury all that hurt through whatever your poison is. And so grandson comes, and I realize, man, I got to straighten myself up. I definitely don't want to, have a bad influence on the grandson, so I put down the drinking. Well, that was all well and good, and I started doing a lot better. And then a few years later, I lost my mom, and that was devastating. Again, here we come with the grief. I didn't drink though. I didn't relapse or do anything like that. I didn't fall back into that trap. But I went through a really heavy period of grieving, and finally found meditation, and it was like a miracle. And so I finally started listening to that inner, the one that knows me the best, me. I finally started listening to him. And it was like, turns out he's right. He is the one that knows me the best. And so started looking back at my life and all the things that I've done, and it's like, dude, I've been trying to get your attention for all these years, and you wouldn't listen. If you would have just listened from the beginning, which we don't know, like I said, don't beat yourself up too much about it, because that's why we're here, is to learn these things. I always think of it like you're looking at a little kid. This is the way God's got to be looking at us. Looking at a little kid, and the kid falls down, and he's crying, and I did something wrong, I tripped over this thing. But cut yourself some slack, kid. You're just learning how to walk, you're just relax, you're fine. And that's the way God looks at us. You're fine. You're right where you should be. Yeah, you fell down. Get back up, man. It's all going to be fine. But that's why you're here, is to learn all these things. And so, through meditation, it's a natural process, man. And all you got to do is be quiet. Shut your mind off. Quit thinking so much. Listen to your inner self. And you'll get all the answers that you need. You were given all the answers that you need to get through this life and to follow your life's purpose, if you will, or however you want to word it. You were given all that information, but you got to be quiet long enough to hear it. You know, and like I said, it took me 40, 50 years to figure any of this out, but I finally did. And so the other part of all this too is though you've got to everybody does this on their own timeline. You know, I know people that are in their 20s and 30s that know all this. You know, here I am, I'm 58, damn near 60 years old, and I just figured it out a couple of years ago. And it's an ongoing process. You don't figure it all out overnight. Even now, it's not like I've got it all figured out by any means. I'm still learning every day, and so that's why we're here. You know, so again, it's on your own timeline. And the other part of it too is when you're self-medicating, nobody's going to say, "Hey, you need to stop doing that," and you just stop doing it. That's not the way it works. You're going to stop medicating on your own timeline. You're going to have to figure it out yourself and say, "Okay, I've had enough of this lifestyle. I'm done." And you'll put it away. And then when you do, hopefully, meditation may get you there if you try to meditate. You may listen to your inner self and figure that out. But bottom line is, you got to quit medicating, man. It just doesn't work. It just covers everything up and it doesn't go away. You know, when you sober up, you're still there. You know, your problems haven't gone away. Nothing. I mean, and they still don't go away. Even when you meditate, the problems don't go away. You just deal with them better in a more natural way. Like I said, that's a natural process. You know, through this whole process, for me, the discovery of meditation has made me. I've always believed in God, and I've always believed that Jesus died on the cross for our sins, and I've never been super religious. I don't even really believe in organized religion, to be honest with you. I think most of that's hypocritical. Not necessarily hypocritical. That's not the issue. It's the greedy. They're after your money. That's all organized religion's good for, if you want to ask me. But that's just my opinion. You know, if that's what gets you through, then so be it. You know, each his own. But organized religion doesn't work for me. But spirituality is a different story. And meditation changed me from being a believer to a knower. Because if you stop and look at the natural process of meditation, you'll start looking at nature. And that's where it's at. And you'll realize there is a creator of all this. There's no way this was not an accident. I think Einstein said, God's not playing with dice. You know, he's not guessing. This is a perfect creation. So I went from a believer to a knower. And, you know, like I said, it's a natural process to meditate. And you'll come to know yourself better. You'll start taking care of yourself better. Start eating better. You know, if food's your poison, so to speak, that's what you medicate with, you'll start just naturally treating yourself better. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think that's the biggest message is just, man, take it easy on yourself. Forgive yourself a little bit better than you probably ever have. You know, it's just like that little kid. You would tell them, "Oh, you're going to be fine." Well, so are you. You're going to be fine.